Welcome back, Down Below. I'm Ian.
I'm Steve.
We are talking about the role-playing game universe we're creating. Today, you get to hear Zordon calling for me because I forgot to silence my phone. Also, about technology, speaking of phones.
Yep, and phones are actually not a bad place to start. Phones and computers. The thing about Down Below is that it is basically a science fiction setting. It's not a far, far future science fiction setting. We're not talking about Star Trek-type space exploration. Even Star Trek Enterprise, which bizarrely was more and less advanced than certain things, but we're not going there. We're talking about the proverbial 5 minutes in the future cyberpunk style of high-tech. A lot of this is a moot point. Really, the people interacting with technology are... those who do it in an everyday sense are kind of blind to it. Let's look at cell phones, as previously mentioned. 10 years ago, cell phones were... some people had flip phones, some people had bricks. Not everyone even had one. Nowadays, they're ubiquitous, especially among middle-class, middle-income families and up. Same with computers. When I was growing up, it was rare for a family to have one, and now if I visit my family for a reunion, most people have two or more, and I personally have 1.5, and they're just, how do you live without one?
And much like in reality, a lot of this progress has been invisible unless you are specifically looking at it. You can look back and see it, but at the time you only see you are using what there is now. And moreover, in a cyberpunk context, the whole point of the 5 minutes in the future type of sci-fi is that the new technology is usually only focused on and introduced when it is an important plot point. Otherwise, the cyberpunk type of near-future sci-fi mostly looks at the effects of technology that we are already experiencing the development of,
So,
taken to a slight extreme in what effect it has on people.
so storyline-wise and setting-wise, here's really the two things I wanted to talk about. The first is the first is the concept of firsts being important, and the second is the concept of the most important thing about technology not being the haves and the have-nots, but rather being the gap between cutting edge and yesterday's model. Let's talk about firsts first. Just like with in the modern day, there's a lot of brouhaha for a few minutes about the new iPhone 6. Before long, people forget that it's a new thing, and it's just the thing I'm holding in my hand, tapping on. All the specifications are forgotten. The fact that it's better than the previous model or worse than the previous model is forgotten. It's just the phone. What's remembered is the iPhone. What's remembered is the fact that this was the first commercially available smartphone. In the world of Down Below, what's remembered are the first bionic limb successfully integrated, the first brain transplant, the first operational orbital elevator, the first trip through a Tannhauser gate.
And just like in the real world, some of these firsts are actually the first. The Wright brothers at Kitty Hawk were actually the first successful aeroplane test. Whereas some firsts are not actually the first, they're just the memorable first. For example, Thomas Edison did not create the first light bulb. He did have the first commercial success with light bulbs.
So what's remembered is the first. So again, with the first Tannhauser gate, that's remembered. That goes down in history. That's a holiday in some school districts. Mm-hmm. That's an internet celebrity moment. But nowadays, even when a new Tannhauser gate is discovered, it's news for 5 minutes, and then it's folded into the status quo. Same with orbital elevators. The first one took a decade before someone even tried to copy it because of the risks involved, because everyone was saying wait and see, because it was such a huge thing. Now, not only are there day trips up and down the elevator for school field trips, but there are perhaps 7 worldwide, and there's a new one under construction in Alaska. Isn't that cool? What is not memorable are the microscopic or even macroscopic advances that happen. The new one under construction is going to be almost 50% faster than the original. It's going to be over 80% more fuel efficient. It's going to be able to handle phenomenally more cargo space. It's going to be even more friendly to travelers going up and down, and nobody really cares because
Especially
it's a space
not
elevator.
once it's finished, because
Right.
once it's finished, it will be there. For 5 minutes, it will be the proverbial 5 minutes.
Right.
It might be an actual week, but the point is, it will have its time of fame and fade.
And this brings us into the difference between the where the real story happens, and that is the difference between the cutting edge technology and the status quo, or better yet, last week's model.
Actually, one thing I'd like to touch on before we move into that
Sure.
is just to mention, core to the setting, we have actually previously introduced you to a couple of things that use the concept of the first as it is in the setting and really showcase what we're talking about. Yggdrasil itself, with the island of Nuevo Paradiso, its entire importance to the setting is because it was the first.
Right.
Similarly, there is one first which hasn't lost its special firstness yet that we've talked about, and that's Lagrange City. If another Lagrange Point Space Station city is made, it will be much less special, and the entire concept will become less of a special thing and more of the status quo.
Yep. So let's talk about the differences. In a lot of cyberpunk settings, whether it is fiction, games, or otherwise, the main thrust is that cutting-edge technology is better. Your cutting-edge futuristic gun is better than the revolver you are using. The new cyber limb is better than the old cyber limb. And okay, yeah, technically that's a little true in the world of Downbelow.
But we're more looking at it from the opposite direction, because your characters, because they are in the Downbelow economy, are more likely to have the other end of the spectrum. You're not going to be upgrading from cutting edge to cutting edge. You're going to be making do with not cutting edge and
Yep.
getting slightly closer to it.
So the stuff that falls down below is generally the older but functional stuff. For instance, right now I'm still using an iPhone 3. Why? It works. The reason I'm using it is because it's not worth it to my budget to upgrade to the new stuff. I can't really afford to drop that much money on what, for me, would barely be a quality of life upgrade. So I put up with cursing with the older phone because it does everything I need to do, and I don't need it to do anything cutting edge. Also, it's cheaper. What are people in Downbelow who are outside the system most likely to do? They're not likely to wait in line for the new cutting edge stuff at the boutique down the shop, even down the street, even though they could get it on their credit. They're more likely to make do with what they can get that works. So the chance for your players to score something big might actually not be scoring the new military prototype mech suit. It might be scoring a last week's replacement motor for a broken down cyber leg, instead of trying to hotwire it yet again and putting stove grease in instead of proper lubricant, because that's what we've got.
So, the core concept of what makes technology special is something that we will explore more in future videos.
Yep.
Thanks for taking a moment to consider technology in our cyberpunk future, and tomorrow we're going to talk to you a little bit about the role of technology and other stuff you have with the game system. So please fall through the cracks with us again, and we'll see you tomorrow.